Welcome back to Part 2 of SciAp HyperDoc Module 2 for Building Background and Review and Assessment. At this point, you should have taken a moment to review some of the slides linked in the Explain portion of the SciAp HyperDoc so that you're ready to go and you've built your background for Part 2. We're going to continue looking at Eta Carina, the Homunculus Nebula, and compare how building background through the course materials provided in this HyperDoc have helped you access the content this time around. By now you should probably know that a Homunculus Nebula is a celestial body, two stars that are orbiting each other, and Eta Carina is one of them. If you haven't yet already watched these videos, please pause the session here, return to the HyperDoc, and watch video number 1 and 2 linked on the slides. Now that you know what Eta Carina is, let's look at it a little bit more in depth. Eta Carina is a homunculus nebula, and it is the most luminous, massive stellar system within 10,000 light-years of Earth. It contains at least 2 stars with a combined luminosity of over 5 million times that of the Sun. The 2 stars that are orbiting each other within Eta Carina come close together about every 5.5 years. At this point, when the 2 stars are close to each other, called periastron, scientists stop and observe the interactions of their solar winds. You can see that there are different protrusions and dust skirts that happen when these 2 stars are in periastron. This homunculus nebula has the form of 2 stars sort of in an hourglass figure, and that's how it gets its name, a homunculus nebula. Let's pause and look at the features within SciAp Component Number 8, Review and Assessment. This includes a comprehensive review of key vocabulary. So if we look back at Eta Carina, the key vocabulary for understanding what the solar system is are things like nebula, star, periastron. We've also reviewed key concepts like what is periastron, why are these stars so important, and what is Eta Carina. Regular feedback is provided to students on their output. If we were in a face-to-face session, this could look like feedback between teacher and student, feedback between peers, conversations about vocabulary, and discussing key vocabulary features. In this online learning environment, we've been using things like stops and checks for understanding, metacognitive strategies, and opportunities for you to engage with the material in a video, in a presentation, and listening to my voice. Assessment of student comprehension and learning of all objectives should happen throughout the lesson. This means that the content and learning objectives that we learned how to write in Module 1 should really guide your review and your assessment throughout the lesson. If your goal was to have students write about what Eta Carina is, then your assessment should be looking at that writing piece, giving students feedback, and making sure that they were able to meet those goals. If your content objective was to explain what Eta Carina is, then you should give students an opportunity to explain. There are a lot of opportunities for different assessment and adaptations for EL students. Each EL learner can show what they know in a different way, and these can range from giving students a different number of items that have to be completed, allowing some students more processing or application time to complete a task, adapting the level of supports provided to an EL student. For example, some students may go off and work on their own during writing. Some may be guided through writing in a small group rotation. Some may need further explanation of the tasks or test items read aloud to them. You can also differentiate by the skill level and difficulty of the task. This will depend on students' background knowledge, their prior schooling experiences, and sometimes their ELP level. Product is a great way to adapt for EL student needs. When we give students the opportunity to choose or adjust how they show what they know, this allows multiple pathways to assessing what EL students can do. Some students, for example, may write an essay. Others may create a model of what Eta Carina is. Some may draw a picture, some may label, and some may do an oral presentation. It all depends on your student's strengths, the purpose of the assessment, and the content goals that you set forth during your planning and preparation stage. You can also adjust the degree of participation that students have to have in any given activity. This is really dependent upon their comfort in the class, affective filter, and their ability to use language in the group setting. Feedback is highly important for EL students. We know that it has a high impact factor in John Hattie's research, and that feedback can really help make students more aware of their learning and their metacognitive strategies, but also make learning visual. For EL students in particular, this requires specific feedback on language, vocabulary, and content, so that teachers can provide specific feedback to students that clarify misconceptions and misunderstandings, while also helping students' proficiency in English. When we look at the 8 SIAP components, in this module we've touched on 2, building background and review and assessment. Within building background, we saw concepts linking to background. That was what you saw in those videos from NASA. Links to past learning and new learning. This is when we discussed where you may have seen these terms before. And developing key vocabulary, like when we reviewed the key vocabulary needed to understand what a homunculus nebula is and what Eta Carina is. The review and assessment features that we saw today included comprehensive review of key vocabulary, comprehensive review of key content concepts, regular feedback provided to students on their output, which will take place in your HyperDoc module between peers, and then also your assessment of comprehension and learning of all session objectives. Can you explain what Eta Carina is? Take a moment and write down your explanation of what Eta Carina is in your notes. You'll revisit those later when we have our group discussion and work to observe another lesson for building background and review and assessment, and pull those out again. Thank you so much for listening to Module 2 Part 2, and I look forward to reading your responses in our HyperDoc modules.